An airport gate is supposed to be a place of order, of rules and privilege, where lines are drawn and only certain passengers are allowed to step forward. But what happens when those rules become weapons? What happens when a man in a tailored suit is told, loudly and publicly, that he doesn't belong simply because of the color of his skin? Marcus Hale was not just another passenger. He was one of the most formidable litigators in the country, a man whose words in courtrooms could shift the future of entire corporations. Yet at 30,000 feet, humiliation became his boarding pass. A gate agent dismissed him. His opponents laughed, and the airline's own lawyers thought they had watched him defeated. They had no idea that by the time this flight touched down, Marcus Hale would unleash a move so brilliant, so devastating, that it would shatter careers, rewrite corporate policy, and force an airline to confront its own prejudice. How does a single act of discrimination transform into a legacy of justice? How can one man's quiet fury become a blueprint for change? Stay with us to witness a story where the final verdict is not just law, it is dignity. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so you never miss stories that remind us how justice takes flight. The air in JFK's Terminal 6 was a storm of motion and noise. Rolling suitcase wheels clattered across the tiled floor. Overhead announcements crackled through tired speakers, distorted voices calling out delayed flights and boarding changes. Children laughed too loudly. Someone's phone alarm buzzed in a forgotten bag, and the low murmur of 1,000 conversations blended into the chaotic white noise of travel. For most people, it was overwhelming. For Marcus Hale, it was almost meditative. At 46, Marcus had spent 2 decades of his life navigating environments just like this. Airports, courtrooms, corporate lobbies, all spaces where tension hung in the air like static. And the difference between winning and losing often came down to who could stay calm when everyone else unraveled. He had built his reputation as one of the fiercest corporate litigators in the country, not by yelling the loudest or swaggering the hardest, but by doing the opposite, listening, calculating, waiting for his moment. On this humid August morning, his moment was supposed to be in San Francisco. He was flying out for the final stretch of a high-stakes patent trial. His client, a tech company on the brink of losing everything, depended on him. The opposing side was represented by lawyers backed quietly but powerfully by none other than the very airline he was boarding today, Meridian Airlines. The irony was thick enough to taste. Marcus adjusted the strap of his leather briefcase and walked toward Gate 34, where Meridian Flight 227 to San Francisco was now boarding Group 1. His boarding pass glowed on the screen of his phone. Hale, Marcus, Seat 2A, Group 1, First Class, Priority Boarding, no question. He took his place in the short, orderly VIP line. The cluster of passengers there was a mix of suited executives, frequent flyers with diamond tags dangling from their luggage, and a few well-heeled travelers whose casual clothes were expensive enough to signal their wealth. Marcus, in his tailored navy suit with understated cufflinks, blended seamlessly into that world. Or at least, he should have. Sir. Excuse me. Sir. The voice cut across the boarding area, sharp and high-pitched, designed to command attention rather than offer assistance. Marcus looked up. The gate agent stood with her arms crossed tightly over her chest. A severe blonde bob framed her face, and her expression was already hardened with suspicion. Her name tag read Brenda Kowalski. "This line is for Group 1 boarding," she announced, loudly enough for everyone in earshot. "General boarding hasn't started yet. You'll need to wait over there." She pointed toward the crowded mass of passengers pressed against the stanchions, waiting for their turn. Marcus felt it immediately, the familiar tightening in his chest, the silent calculation of what this was. He had been here before. Different cities, different gate agents, same playbook. A black man in a suit, standing where someone decided he did not belong. He kept his voice level. "I believe I am in the right place." He raised his phone. The boarding pass clear on the screen. Seat 2A, Group 1. Brenda barely glanced. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "There are a lot of people trying to cut in today. I'll need to see your paper ticket." Marcus blinked slowly. "Mobile boarding passes are valid. This is my ticket." "Sir," Brenda said, louder this time, "if you can't produce the ticket I'm asking for, you're holding up the line for our valued customers." The word landed like a slap. Valued. As though his presence here, his years of loyalty, his million miles flown, his platinum status counted for nothing. Behind him, someone coughed impatiently. Marcus turned his head slightly and saw him, Richard Collins, lead counsel for the opposing side in his San Francisco trial. Richard's tailored gray suit was expensive but hung stiffly on his frame. His smirk, however, fit perfectly. Beside him was his associate, a younger lawyer shifting uncomfortably but saying nothing. Richard leaned in just enough for Marcus to notice. He whispered something to the associate and chuckled under his breath. The chuckle carried, casual and cutting. Marcus's jaw tightened. He could escalate. He could demand a supervisor. He could flash the onyx-colored elite card in his wallet, a status so rare most airline employees had never even seen one. But none of that would change what was happening. This wasn't about a ticket. This was about perception, about a gate agent's quick judgment of who looked like they belonged. His eyes met Brenda's. She stood firm, waiting for him to argue. Instead, Marcus gave a slow nod. "Very well." He stepped out of the line, his back straight, his face unreadable. Around him, he felt the eyes of strangers, some sympathetic, some indifferent, and some, like Richard's, smugly satisfied. Brenda, flushed with triumph, turned back to her scanner. "Next," she called sweetly, "welcome aboard. Mr. Collins," she said moments later. Her voice dipped in honey as she scanned Richard's ticket. "Have a wonderful flight." Richard strode down the jet bridge without looking back, his associate in tow. Marcus walked to the end of the snaking line for groups 4 and 5. The general boarding crowd was thick with families juggling strollers, young travelers with overstuffed backpacks, and weary business people clutching paper cups of burnt coffee. He joined them, silent. He could feel the humiliation pressing down, heavy and sharp. It wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. But the presence of Richard Collins made it sting in a new way. This wasn't just indignity. It was advantage handed to his opponent like a gift. The line shuffled forward. When it was finally his turn, the scanner beeped with the same impersonal tone as always. The agent at the desk, flustered and avoiding his eyes, tapped a few keys. "You've been reassigned," she mumbled. "Seat 28E. Enjoy your flight." Marcus said nothing. He walked down the jet bridge, past the gleaming leather of first class, past the seat that was supposed to be his. He caught Richard's eye for the briefest moment. Richard raised his glass of scotch and a mock toast, his smirk cutting deeper than words. Marcus kept walking, steady as ever, until he reached the cramped rows of premium economy. Seat 28E, middle seat. He slid into the narrow space between a businessman already snoring and a teenager blasting music through tinny earbuds. The fury was there, cold and quiet. But Marcus Hale did not burn hot. He never had. He knew how to wait. And at 35,000 feet, waiting could become the most powerful weapon in the world. Marcus settled into 28E with the kind of deliberate calm that comes only from years of practice. He placed his briefcase carefully beneath the seat in front of him, angling it so the latches would not catch on his shoes. The businessman to his left gave a sudden snort, shifted, and fell deeper into sleep, the sour smell of airport whiskey clinging to his clothes. On his right, the teenager bobbed her head to the thumping beat leaking from her headphones, thumbs flying across her phone screen in an endless scroll. Neither acknowledged him. In this narrow strip of the cabin, he was invisible. The hum of boarding filled the space as passengers squeezed down the aisle, wrestling overhead bins shut with tired grunts. Flight attendants repeated the same lines in practiced voices. "Please keep the aisle clear. Place smaller bags under the seat in front of you. We'll be closing the door shortly." Marcus sat still, his hands folded loosely in his lap, his face unreadable, but inside, the humiliation coiled tight. He replayed the scene at the gate in his mind. The way Brenda Kowalski had spoken to him like a child trying to sneak candy. The way Richard Collins had smiled. The soft chuckle he knew was meant for him. The reassignment to 28E was more than an inconvenience. It was a declaration. You do not belong up front. You do not deserve comfort. Sit in the middle. Stay unseen. For a moment, anger surged hot and raw. He imagined standing up, marching to the front, demanding his rightful seat. He pictured himself pulling the black onyx card from his wallet, dropping it onto the podium like a gauntlet, watching Brenda's face crumble as she realized her mistake. He could hear the gasps from the other passengers, the whispered apologies, but the vision dissolved quickly. That was not his way. Marcus had never believed in small victories won by shouting. They fed the ego, but solved nothing. What he wanted was not a scene in an airport. What he wanted was justice on a scale that mattered. He exhaled slowly, long enough to let the heat drain from his chest. His thoughts turned colder, sharper. He had been embarrassed. He had been pushed aside in full view of his rival. But humiliation, if harnessed, was a kind of energy. And Marcus Hale had spent his career turning raw energy into strategy. The seatbelt sign chimed overhead as the plane pushed back from the gate. The familiar rumble of the engines rising filled the cabin. A child began to cry, 2 rows back. The teenager next to him rolled her eyes dramatically and turned her music louder. Marcus closed his own eyes, leaning back into the headrest. For 90 seconds, he let himself feel it, every sting, every cut from the years of being second-guessed, of being asked for extra identification when others walked freely, of being mistaken for the assistant when he was the lead attorney, of being told in subtle, unspoken ways that his place was somewhere else. He felt all of it. He gave it the space it demanded. Let the anger and weariness wash through him like a tide. And then, as the plane tilted upward and the city fell away beneath them, he folded those emotions neatly and put them aside. He would not waste them in the cramped row of 28E. He would save them for something far greater. When he opened his eyes again, he was no longer thinking as a humiliated passenger. He was thinking as a litigator. Facts. Leverage, timing the architecture of his world. Fact 1. He had held a valid Group 1 ticket for Seat 2A. Fact 2. A gate agent employed by Meridian Airlines had denied him that seat, in direct violation of the contract of carriage. Fact 3. The denial had been public, humiliating, and witnessed by opposing counsel in the very case Meridian Airlines was financially backing. He almost smiled. If it had been designed by a playwright, the irony could not have been sharper. The beverage cart rattled down the aisle as the plane leveled off. A flight attendant leaned toward him, polite and professional. "Sir, can I get you something to drink before we begin service?" "Just water." "Thank you," Marcus said softly. Her tone was neutral, efficient, without the suspicion of the gate. The contrast was almost absurd. He took the plastic cup, the water cool against his palm, and thought again of Richard Collins sitting comfortably in 2B. He imagined the scotch in his hand, the laughter, the easy certainty that tomorrow's trial was already theirs. Richard thrived on arrogance. He treated the law as theater, his booming voice filling courtrooms, his gestures exaggerated for effect. To him, Marcus was not a peer, but an obstacle, something to be dismissed, mocked, diminished. Marcus had no interest in theater. He preferred the quiet kill of precision. The seat was uncomfortable, pressing against his shoulders, his knees brushing the seat in front of him. Yet, in a way, it was exactly where he needed to be. The humiliation Brenda thought she had inflicted was becoming fuel. From 28E, Marcus was already building the strategy that would unravel Richard's confidence and Meridian's power. He remembered something his father used to say. "They'll always test you, Marcus. They'll look at you and see less. The question is, what do you do with that? Do you let them write your story, or do you pick up the pen?" Marcus had picked up the pen long ago. Today, he would write in bold strokes. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the flight attendants prepared for meal service. Around him, passengers settled into the long hall, pulling out neck pillows and laptops, sighing into books and half sleep. Marcus reached down and brushed his hand across the smooth leather of his briefcase. Inside were the carefully organized files for Innovexa, his client, months of work, hundreds of hours of preparation. He had come ready to fight a trial. But now, a different fight was presenting itself. He pictured the courtroom tomorrow morning. He pictured the judge's stern face, the opposing counsel lined up, the opening statements ready to begin. And he pictured himself not there, because without him, there could be no trial. That absence alone was leverage, but paired with what had just happened at the gate, paired with the humiliation orchestrated by the very airline funding the lawsuit, it was not just leverage, it was a weapon. He thought of Leah Ortiz, his young associate waiting already in San Francisco. Brilliant, sharp, loyal. She had told him more than once that she saw him not only as a mentor, but as proof of what was possible. Marcus felt a pang of responsibility mixed with pride. He could not teach her to avoid humiliation, because in their world, that was impossible. But he could teach her what to do with it, how to turn it into power. The businessman beside him stirred awake, grunted, and pulled out a packet of peanuts. The teenager switched playlists, head still bobbing. The ordinariness of it all struck Marcus in contrast to the extraordinary plan forming in his mind. Most of these passengers would remember nothing of this flight. But for Marcus Hale, Flight 227 was about to become a turning point. He sipped his water. Calm again. He thought about the motion he would draft, the timing, the way it would hit Richard Collins like a silent torpedo. He thought about Brenda, still standing at some gate in New York, smug in her small authority, never realizing she had just set fire to her own company's credibility. The engines roared softly, steady and relentless. Outside the window, the sky stretched wide and unbroken, the horizon painted in streaks of orange and pink. Marcus let himself stare at it for a moment, a reminder that perspective was everything. He did not belong in 28E, but from this seat, in the cramped middle of premium economy, Marcus Hale was already winning. The plane had leveled into its cruising altitude, the steady hum of the engines filling the cabin with a constant, lulling vibration. Lights above dimmed into a softer glow, and passengers settled into the rhythm of a long flight. The businessman beside Marcus had fallen back into a restless sleep, mouth open slightly as he exhaled in uneven bursts. The teenager on his other side scrolled through her phone, earbuds still blaring a faint tinny beat that only she seemed able to tolerate. For Marcus Hale, the world had shrunk to a narrow space of silence within himself. Outwardly, he was motionless, his posture relaxed, his breathing even. But inside, a storm moved through him. Not the kind of storm that raged wildly, tearing at anything it could touch, but the kind that gathered strength in the stillness, quiet yet heavy, the kind of storm that built pressure until the release was devastating. He had been humiliated. Again, the gate, the demand for a paper ticket, the false assumption that his presence was fraudulent, the small but cutting word, valued, reserved for others, but not for him. He felt the sting as though Brenda Kowalski's voice were still echoing against the jet bridge walls. Humiliation was not unfamiliar. It had followed him his entire life, sometimes subtle, sometimes blatant. He remembered being a young associate at Sterling and Blackwell, dressed sharply and carrying his case files, only to be mistaken by opposing counsel for the assistant tasked with making copies. He remembered walking into a client's office, ready to deliver a winning strategy, only to be asked if his boss would be joining soon. Each moment had left a scar, invisible but lasting. Over time, he had learned to carry those scars without bitterness. He had learned to weaponize them. But tonight, as the plane carried him westward into the fading sun, the weight of them all pressed hard against his chest. He allowed himself the ritual he always returned to in such moments. 90 seconds. That was all he ever gave to unfiltered emotion. He closed his eyes and let it come the anger, sharp and cutting, the weariness, heavy as stone, the grief of having to prove, over and over again, that he belonged in spaces he had earned through brilliance and sacrifice. He thought of his mother, who had worked double shifts at the hospital cafeteria to put him through prep school. He thought of his father, a mechanic who had given him those hard, simple words. When he was young, they will always test you. Marcus, they will look at you and see less. Do not let them write your story. Pick up the pen. The pain rose, peaked, and then receded. 90 seconds. He opened his eyes again. The storm contained, transformed. Emotion was not wasted on rage. It was fuel, redirected into the machinery of his mind. His thoughts began to sharpen, organizing themselves the way they always did when he sensed opportunity hidden within adversity. Fact 1. A valid boarding pass. Denied. Fact 2. Public humiliation. Witnessed by opposing counsel. Fact 3. The plaintiff's financial backer was the airline itself. The connections drew themselves like lines on a chessboard. His opponents believed they had gained an advantage, watching him shuffled back to 28E. In truth, they had overplayed their hand, blinded by arrogance. Marcus reached for his briefcase, fingers brushing against the worn handle. Inside were the files for Innovex's case, the carefully tabbed exhibits and cross-examination notes he had spent months preparing. But the real weapon he needed was not in those files. It was in his mind, in the motion he had already begun drafting in silence, a motion for emergency continuance. The words alone carried weight. To request a delay on the eve of trial was no small move. Judges were notoriously unsympathetic to last-minute disruptions. Yet Marcus knew the strength of his grounds. Travel complications, caused directly by the actions of the plaintiff's backer. Unavoidable. Professionally compromising. Public. prejudicial. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became. This was not merely a procedural tactic. This was a message, a way of saying you cannot humiliate me outside the courtroom and expect me to fight you fairly inside it. Justice required a baseline of respect, and that baseline had been obliterated at the gate. He let the structure of the argument unfold in his mind, piece by piece. First, establish the facts without embellishment. No need to mention racism. No need to describe humiliation. The power lay in simplicity. A valid ticket, a refusal, a reassignment, witnesses. Second, draw the line of connection. The witness was not just anyone, but the very attorney funded by the airline responsible. Third, drive the conclusion. A fair trial was impossible under these compromised conditions. He could almost hear the voice of Judge Albright in his imagination, sharp and skeptical. Travel complications. Mr. Hale. That sounds like an excuse from a first-year associate. Convince me. And Marcus would. Not with theatrics, not with outrage, but with facts so precise they cut like glass. A flicker of doubt crept into his thoughts, as it always did before a bold move. Was this the right strategy? Would the judge see it as genuine necessity or as an opportunistic ploy? Would his client, already stretched thin by legal costs, understand that this delay was protection, not retreat? Marcus pressed his fingertips together and closed his eyes again. He pictured Leah Ortiz, his young associate, waiting in San Francisco. He remembered her words the last time they had spoken, her voice bright with certainty. You don't just win cases, Marcus, you change the game. She had meant it as admiration, but it was also a reminder of responsibility. He was not just playing for himself. Every choice he made rippled outward, shaping the path for those who followed. His doubt quieted. This was not retreat. This was strategy. He would not squander the leverage handed to him by Brenda's prejudice and Richard's smugness. He would transform it. The flight attendant returned, handing out trays of food with the mechanical rhythm of long-haul service, a plastic container of pasta, a roll sealed in plastic, a small square of brownie. Marcus accepted the tray with a polite nod, though his appetite was gone. He pushed the food aside, pulling his laptop from beneath the seat. The businessman beside him stirred, glanced, then turned away. The teenager did not notice at all. The screen glowed as Marcus typed, his fingers moving with steady precision. The title appeared first, Motion for Emergency Continuance. His name, the case number, the date. Then the words began to flow. Simple, clean, devastating. This motion is made on the grounds of unforeseen and unavoidable travel complications, which have created a professionally untenable environment directly caused by the actions of an agent of the plaintiff's primary financial partner, Meridian Airlines. He did not pause to savor the phrasing. He simply moved through it, laying down the affidavit like a surgeon stitching clean lines. He described the boarding pass, the refusal, the reassignment, the presence of Richard Collins. No commentary, no adjectives, just the truth, stripped bare. The power was in what he did not need to say. When the first draft was complete, Marcus sat back, letting the weight of it settle. In this cramped seat, surrounded by strangers oblivious to the storm quietly building, he had just shifted the ground beneath an entire trial. He closed the laptop softly and rested his hand on the cover. His eyes turned to the window, where the last traces of sunlight streaked the horizon. The silence inside him had changed. No longer fury, but resolve. Tomorrow morning, Richard Collins would walk into court expecting victory. Instead, he would be met with delay, sanction, humiliation. And all of it born from a single decision made at a boarding gate by a woman who believed Marcus Hale did not belong in line. The engines droned on, steady as the heartbeat of the machine. The cabin was quiet now, passengers drifting into sleep. Marcus remained awake, his mind a fortress of discipline. He had chosen his battlefield, and it was not at the gate. It would be in the courtroom, where justice would not be begged for, but demanded. The glow of Marcus's laptop cast a pale light across his face, soft against the dimmed cabin. Around him, the world had drifted into slumber. The businessman leaned against the window, mouth open, a soft whistle in his breath. The teenager beside him had finally dozed off too, her phone slipping into her lap, the tinny sound of music now muted. For the first time since boarding, Marcus had space, a pocket of solitude. He scrolled back through the motion he had just written, reading each line with the clinical detachment of a surgeon checking his own incision. The language was spare, factual, immune to interpretation. That was the key. To describe humiliation would be to invite argument about intent. To mention race would be to risk the court dismissing the claim as emotional. But to state that a valid ticket had been rejected, that a reassignment had been forced, that opposing counsel had witnessed the exchange without objection, those were undeniable facts, the kind judges could not ignore. Marcus highlighted a sentence, deleted 3 words, then rewrote it tighter. His motions were always crafted this way, lean and precise, like blades honed until they could cut with the lightest touch. He saved the file, encrypted it, and leaned back. The faint rumble of the engines vibrated through his seat. Steady, relentless, a reminder of movement forward, even in the stillness of the cabin. He closed his eyes and pictured the courtroom in San Francisco, the long wooden tables polished to a sterile shine, the judge's raised bench commanding silence, the jury box waiting to be filled. He had been preparing to walk into that arena with the full weight of Innovexa's defense on his shoulders. Now, he would arrive differently, not as the man forced into a middle seat, but as the man who had turned humiliation into leverage. Still, a flicker of unease lingered. Judges were unpredictable. Some relished strict schedules, dismissing any disruption as weakness. Was he risking too much by pulling this move? Was the court ready to see the connection between a gate agent's decision and the integrity of a $500 million trial? Marcus opened his eyes and stared at the seat back in front of him, tracing the worn fabric with his gaze. He had built his career on calculated risks. The greatest victories he had ever won came not from playing it safe, but from stepping into uncertainty with precision and courage. This was no different. He thought of his client, Innovexa's CEO, a man named Daniel Cho. Brilliant, visionary, but terrified of losing the company he had built from nothing. Marcus had promised him not just defense, but victory. If Cho heard about the motion without context, he might panic. But Marcus knew how to steady him. The key was confidence. If Marcus sounded unshaken, Cho would follow. Clients, like juries, borrowed strength from the voices they trusted. The cabin lights shifted again as the crew moved down the aisle, checking seatbelts, offering water. A young flight attendant paused near Marcus, her smile warm despite the fatigue in her eyes. "Sir, do you need anything else? Coffee, tea?" "No, thank you," Marcus said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. He saw in her professionalism the stark contrast to Brenda Kowalski's venom. This woman treated him like any other passenger. Proof, if he needed it. That prejudice was not inevitable. It was a choice. As she moved on, Marcus opened his phone, connecting to the sluggish in-flight Wi-Fi. The signal wavered, painfully slow, but stable enough for his purpose. He drafted a message to Leah Ortiz. "Leah, be ready. I will be sending you a motion within the hour. File it with the clerk first thing in the morning. I will call with details once we land. Trust the timing." He paused, fingers hovering. Then he added one more line. "Remember what I told you. Sometimes the real fight begins before we ever step into court." He hit send and slipped the phone back onto the tray table. The teenager beside him stirred, mumbling in her sleep. The businessman shifted and muttered something incoherent. Marcus looked past them, out the small oval window. Darkness stretched in every direction, the wing cutting across the night sky like a silver blade. Somewhere beneath them, the country sprawled, cities glowing faintly, highways traced with moving headlights. From this altitude, all of it looked fragile, miniature, almost insignificant. Perspective was everything. He thought again of Richard Collins, reclining comfortably in 2B with his scotch, confident, arrogant, untroubled. Marcus could see it so clearly the moment Richard would switch on his phone after landing, expecting congratulations and finding instead an email from the court, a notification of postponement, a sanction looming. That moment alone was worth every hour spent in 28E. Marcus felt the faintest smile touch his lips. It was not joy, not triumph, but satisfaction. A quiet confirmation that the balance of power was already shifting. Yet beneath the satisfaction was something heavier, more complex. Weariness. He was tired of this fight, tired of having to prove again and again that he belonged in spaces he had already earned, tired of the constant vigilance required just to exist without being diminished. He wondered, for the briefest moment, what it might feel like to live without that weight, to board a plane without suspicion, to walk into a courtroom without being underestimated. The thought was dangerous because it was unattainable. He pushed it aside, not with bitterness, but with discipline. His reality was his battlefield, and on battlefields, longing had no place. Only strategy did. He opened his laptop again and began drafting an affidavit. His fingers moved quickly, guided by the clarity of focus. He described the incident with the same precision as before the boarding pass on his phone. The refusal, the reassignment, the presence of opposing counsel. Each fact stacked neatly on the one before it, forming a tower too solid to topple. Halfway through, he paused, staring at the blinking cursor. His reflection stared back at him from the darkened screen, faint against the lines of text. He saw his own eyes, calm but unyielding. He thought of his father's words, of Leah's trust, of the countless others who would never have the power to turn such humiliation into justice. For them, this was just another wound, carried silently. For him, it was leverage, and he owed it to them to use it. By the time he finished, the cabin was silent. The flight attendants had disappeared into their galley. The lights dimmed further. Marcus saved the file, encrypted it again, and shut the laptop with a soft click. He sat back, closing his eyes, letting the quiet hum of the engines wash over him. He imagined the ripple of what he had set in motion, spreading outward from this cramped row. Tomorrow morning, a judge would hear his voice, read his words, and feel the weight of what had been done. Richard Collins would stumble. Brenda Kowalski would be forgotten. And Meridian Airlines would realize too late that a single act of prejudice at a boarding gate had triggered consequences far beyond its walls. Sleep did not come easily, but Marcus did not mind. He had built his life on long nights and heavier burdens, and as the plane cut through the night sky, he felt the steady pulse of resolve anchor him at 35,000 feet, in a middle seat meant to diminish him. Marcus Hale had already begun to rewrite the story. The cabin was hushed. A blanket of low breathing and soft engine hum stretched across the rows. Marcus Hale sat upright, eyes closed, but his mind was wide awake. Hours had passed since they left New York, and the flight now drifted smoothly over the Midwest. When he opened his eyes, the clock on his screen read 3:12 a.m. Eastern Time. He had been through this rhythm too many times before late nights on red-eye flights. Mind balancing between exhaustion and sharpened clarity. He rubbed his temples lightly, feeling the familiar pressure behind his eyes, the toll of long weeks spent preparing for battle. Yet beneath the fatigue was something steadier, something that anchored him. Resolve. He reached again for his phone. The Wi-Fi signal flickered, a fragile lifeline in the sky. He checked his inbox. No new messages yet from Leah. She was likely asleep in her San Francisco hotel room, waiting for his instructions. He thought briefly of calling her anyway, but decided against it. Timing mattered. Too soon, and she might fumble. Too late, and Collins might regain ground. Timing was everything. Marcus thought back to a trial years ago, one that had nearly broken him. He had been a young partner then, going up against a team twice his size, their resources endless, their arrogance suffocating. He remembered pacing the hotel hallway at 2 a.m, phone pressed to his ear, coaching his associate through a last-minute motion. He had felt the same weight then that he felt now, the knowledge that his decisions did not just shape cases, they shaped lives. That trial had ended in a victory no one had predicted, and the lesson had stayed with him. The right move, at the right moment, could topple giants. He stared at the dark screen of his phone, then tapped the call button. Leah's voice came groggy but alert when she answered. "Marcus, it's me," he said. His voice was calm. Even, "Sorry to wake you." "No, it's fine," she said quickly, the rustle of sheets audible on the other end. "I've been half expecting you'd call. What's happening?" Marcus inhaled slowly, choosing his words. "I've drafted a motion. Emergency continuance. It will shift everything. I'll send it to you within the next hour. When it comes through, I need you to file it with the clerk first thing. Don't wait. Once it's filed, forward confirmation to opposing counsel and Judge Albright's chambers." There was a pause. He could almost hear her mind catching up, calculating the implications. A continuance, she repeated. "Marcus, the trial is tomorrow." "Are you sure I am?" he said simply. "But this isn't about delay for the sake of delay. It's about integrity. My presence is necessary for this trial. What happened today has compromised that." He explained briefly, dispassionately, the incident at the gate, the refusal, the reassignment, the presence of Richard Collins and his associate. He didn't dramatize, didn't embellish. He let the facts speak for themselves. Leah's voice sharpened with anger as she listened. "They did that to you in front of Collins. That's—" She trailed off, but Marcus knew what she wanted to say, that it was outrageous, that it was racist, that it was humiliating. "Yes," Marcus said softly, "but we won't call it that. We'll call it what it is, a breach, a disruption, a compromise of fairness. The rest will be obvious to anyone who reads it." Leah was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice carried the steadiness he had been hoping for. "Understood. I'll be ready." Marcus nodded, though she couldn't see him. Good. And Leah? Yes, trust the timing. Don't question it. File when I tell you. I will, she said firmly. Marcus, I know you don't need to hear this, but I'll say it anyway. You're doing the right thing. He closed his eyes briefly, letting her words settle. Then he ended the call, the line going quiet. The silence returned, but it was no longer heavy. It was purposeful. Marcus drafted a second message, this one shorter, to Daniel Cho. Daniel, a situation developed during my travel that required immediate action. I've filed for a continuance to ensure fairness at trial. This is protective, not retreat. Trust me, I have it under control. We'll speak when I land. He read it twice before sending. Clients didn't need every detail. Not yet. They needed calm. They needed confidence. That was what he gave them. The cabin lights flicked brighter as the crew prepared for breakfast service. The faint smell of coffee drifted down the aisle, breaking the monotony of recycled air. Marcus accepted a cup from a passing attendant, the steam curling into his face. He held it in his hands, savoring the warmth. Across the aisle, a young woman stirred and opened her laptop. The glow reflected in her glasses, illuminating her focused expression. Marcus watched her type furiously, lost in her own battle. He wondered what she was working on: an assignment, a report, a presentation. He wondered if she, too, knew what it meant to fight for respect in spaces designed to exclude. He sipped the coffee, bitter but grounding. His mind wandered briefly to Brenda Kowalski. He wondered if she had gone home that night feeling triumphant, proud of herself for protecting the sanctity of her line. He wondered if she had told anyone what she had done, if she had laughed about it with colleagues. She could not possibly know the change she had set in motion, how her small act of prejudice had become the fulcrum upon which a $500 million case now balanced. Marcus felt no pity for her, only clarity. Prejudice was never small. It was cumulative. It stacked upon itself, one slight on top of another, until the weight crushed those beneath it. Tonight, Brenda's prejudice had been transformed into leverage. Tomorrow, it would be her undoing. He finished the coffee, set the cup aside, and leaned back. The hum of the engines was steady, almost hypnotic, but Marcus's mind remained sharp. The storm inside now focused into a single point. In the quiet of that cabin, he felt the shift. The humiliation at the gate had been real, painful, raw, but it had also been necessary. Without it, he would have walked into court tomorrow, prepared but conventional. Now, he was something else entirely, a force sharpened by indignity, ready to strike with precision. The flight attendants moved through the aisle again, collecting cups and trays. The first light of dawn touched the edge of the horizon, faint and pink. Marcus turned toward it, watching as the sky slowly transformed. He whispered to himself, barely audible over the engines, "This is how they learn." The businessman beside him stirred, blinking awake. The teenager yawned loudly, stretching her arms. The cabin began to buzz with life again, passengers preparing for descent, but Marcus sat still, steady, waiting. His timing was perfect. In less than an hour, the motion would be filed. In less than a day, Richard Collins would realize just how badly he had underestimated him. And in less than a week, Meridian Airlines would understand that a single man, humiliated at their gate, had become the architect of their reckoning. The plane dipped slightly, beginning its descent. The seatbelt sign chimed. Passengers shifted, gathered their belongings, straightened in their seats. Marcus folded his hands in his lap and closed his eyes. One last time. He was ready. from 35,000 feet, justice was already in motion. The captain's voice broke through the cabin speakers, calm and practiced. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our initial descent into San Francisco. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." The familiar chime followed, and the cabin stirred awake like a hive roused from sleep. Marcus Hale opened his eyes slowly. He had dozed for no more than 20 minutes, but it was enough to settle his body. The exhaustion of a long night still lingered, yet his mind remained sharp, anchored by the plan already in motion. Around him, passengers tucked away their laptops, folded blankets, shifted bags beneath seats. The businessman beside him adjusted his tie, muttering under his breath about an upcoming meeting. The teenager stretched and reached immediately for her phone, eager to reconnect with the world below. Marcus unlocked his device, reconnecting to the sluggish in-flight Wi-Fi as the plane tilted in descent. A new message blinked at him. From Leah. "Ready? Alert at the courthouse. Send when you give the word." Marcus's jaw tightened with focus. Timing was no longer a matter of hours. It was minutes. He drafted a quick reply. "Wait for my signal. File in 15. Confirmation to all parties immediately after." He did not hesitate before hitting send. Once the wheels touched down, Collins would already be locked into the trap he had unknowingly walked into. The plane tilted, the skyline of San Francisco visible now through the thin morning haze. Golden light stretched across the water, catching the outline of bridges, the bay shimmering like polished glass. Marcus glanced at the view, but only briefly. His thoughts were fixed on the courthouse across the city, where soon a clerk would open a motion stamped with his name. He reached into his briefcase, fingers brushing over his meticulously tabbed files, then pulled out a smaller leather notebook. He opened to a blank page and began jotting fragments in his tight, controlled handwriting. Words not for the court, not for the record, but for himself. Integrity, timing, leverage, dignity weaponized. Each word was an anchor, a reminder of why he had chosen this path. The plane shuddered gently as the landing gear dropped. A heavy mechanical sound felt more than heard. A few passengers gripped armrests instinctively, but Marcus remained still, pen scratching softly across the page. He stopped only when the wheels struck the runway with a thundering jolt, the engines roaring as the aircraft slowed. Phones around the cabin lit up instantly, buzzing, chiming, vibrating in an orchestra of digital life. Marcus unlocked his again, scrolling through the messages pouring in. One stood out, a short, clipped note from Daniel Cho. "What's happening?" "Need clarity," Marcus typed back quickly. "Filing motion now. Situation controlled. We'll call within the hour. Trust me." He knew Daniel well enough to anticipate the reply, and it came. Seconds later. "I do. Don't let them break us." Marcus exhaled, a faint relief threading through his chest. Trust was everything in moments like this, and Daniel still gave it freely. The plane rolled to a stop at the gate. The chime sounded, and half the cabin leapt from their seats, pulling bags from overhead bins, jostling impatiently. Marcus remained seated. He had no interest in fighting the crowd. Patience was his ally now. He waited as the rows emptied, passengers filing toward the narrow jet bridge. At last he rose, collecting his briefcase, moving with deliberate calm. He walked the aisle steadily, passing row after row until he reached the open door. Sunlight spilled into the cabin, harsh after the dim glow inside. He stepped onto the jet bridge and inhaled the cool morning air of San Francisco. At the terminal, He found a quiet corner near a row of windows and set down his briefcase. He opened his laptop once more, connected to airport Wi-Fi, and typed a single line to Leah. "File now." The response came within seconds. "On it." Marcus checked his watch, eyes tracking the sweep of the second hand. He could imagine it already, Leah walking briskly through the courthouse doors, handing the packet to the clerk, the official stamp pressing down with finality, a document born in row 28E now transforming into an earthquake under the feet of his opponents. His phone buzzed again. Leah this time. Filed. Confirmation sent to chambers and opposing counsel. Motion live. Marcus's shoulders lowered fractionally, the weight of preparation shifting into action. He typed back only 2 words. Well done. Now came the waiting. He knew Collins would see the notification within minutes. He pictured him disembarking from first class, phone in hand, expecting congratulatory emails or a dinner invitation. Instead, he would be greeted by the cold, blunt words of a federal court filing, emergency continuance, grounds actions of Meridian Airlines. Marcus almost pitied him. Almost. He left the terminal, moving through the bustle of morning travelers. The air outside was crisp, touched by the salt of the bay. He hailed a cab and slid into the back seat, giving the address of his hotel downtown. As the car pulled away, he allowed himself a rare moment of stillness. The first stage was complete. The board had shifted. Yet as the city passed by outside the window, Marcus felt the edge of fatigue pressing in again. He leaned back against the seat and closed his eyes, hearing in his memory the voice of Judge Albright, sharp, impatient, skeptical. He knew the hearing tomorrow would not be easy. The judge would demand clarity, justification, restraint. Marcus would give him all 3. But still, doubt whispered at the edges. What if Albright saw it as manipulation? What if the continuance was granted? But Marcus's credibility paid the price. Would Innovexa see him as protector or as risk? He opened his eyes and shook his head slightly. Doubt was natural, but it was not truth. The facts were on his side, and more than facts, the principle was. This was not about tactics. It was about fairness. He repeated the word silently, like a mantra. Fairness. That was the core. That was what Albright would hear if Marcus delivered it with precision. The cab slowed, weaving through morning traffic, horns echoing faintly against tall glass buildings. Marcus stared out at the skyline, the city rising bright in the daylight. He thought of Leah again, her determination, her voice steady despite the hour. He thought of Daniel Cho, trusting him still. He thought of his father's words, of his mother's sacrifices, of all the people who would never have the luxury of turning humiliation into leverage. That was why this mattered. It was never just about him. The cab pulled up to the hotel entrance. Marcus stepped out, briefcase in hand, and nodded to the driver. Inside. The lobby buzzed with business travelers, suitcases rolling across marble floors, voices echoing off high ceilings. He checked in quickly, the receptionist polite but brisk, and made his way upstairs. In his room, he placed his briefcase on the desk and stood for a moment by the window. The city spread wide before him, the bay glittering in the sun, the bridges spanning like veins of steel. He loosened his tie, the silk falling slack, and felt the exhaustion sweep back over him. But before rest, there was one more call. He dialed Daniel Cho, holding the phone to his ear. The line clicked, and Daniel's voice came through, taut with urgency. "Marcus, tell me." Marcus spoke evenly, his tone carrying the weight of calm. "The motion is filed. It will hit them before they can react. Tomorrow morning, we face Albright, but the ground has already shifted. Collins is compromised. Meridian is exposed. This is our moment." Daniel exhaled audibly on the other end. "You sound certain." "I am," Marcus said simply. "We're not retreating. We're protecting the trial's integrity. And when we walk into court again, it will be on our terms." Silence lingered. Then Daniel's voice came back. Quieter. "Do what you do best. Marcus, I trust you." The line ended. Marcus set the phone down and finally allowed himself to sit on the edge of the bed. His body was heavy, his mind still sharp, his heart steady. The city outside pulsed with life, unaware that within its courts tomorrow, the balance of justice was already shifting. He lay back briefly, eyes closing, the hum of distant traffic rising like a lullaby. Sleep crept in quickly this time, unresisted. The battlefield awaited, but for now, Marcus rested in the knowledge that the first blow had been struck. Richard Collins adjusted his cufflinks as the plane rolled toward the gate. He felt the buzz of anticipation coursing through him, the heady mixture of fatigue and adrenaline that always came before a major trial. For months he had prepared, fine-tuned arguments, memorized precedents, polished every word of his opening statement. In less than 24 hours, he would stand in a San Francisco courtroom and dismantle Inavexa with surgical precision. He had already rehearsed the applause from his client, already pictured the approving nods of the board at Meridian Airlines, already felt the warm glow of victory dinners and congratulatory calls. His associate, a young man named Brian, leaned toward him. "We're set for 9 tomorrow. I confirmed with the team on the ground. Exhibits are ready, witnesses prepped. We're untouchable." Collins smirked, swirling the last sip of scotch in his glass. "Exactly. Tomorrow's just a formality. The case is ours." The seatbelt sign chimed, and the cabin filled with the clatter of seatbelts unbuckling, overhead bins opening, voices chattering. Collins straightened his jacket and switched on his phone. The screen blinked awake, and immediately a flood of notifications surged across it. At first he dismissed them with mild irritation. Probably routine updates, a last-minute note from the office. But then he saw the subject line of the first email. Filing notification, Case 3. 22CV0917. His eyes narrowed. He tapped quickly, scrolling through the attached PDF. The words leapt at him, black and merciless on the white screen. Motion for emergency continuance. Grounds professionally untenable environment created by Meridian Airlines. Plaintiff's financial backer. His throat constricted. No, this had to be a mistake. He scrolled further. The affidavit laid out every detail with clinical precision the boarding pass displayed. The refusal, the reassignment, the humiliation, and most damning of all, the presence of Richard Collins himself at the scene. He had been named. He had been witnessed. His inaction, his smirk, his silence all recorded now in the permanent language of a federal filing. Richard Bryan asked, seeing the color drain from his mentor's face. "What is it?" Collins shoved the phone toward him. "Read it." Bryan's eyes darted across the screen, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm. This names you. It says you were there." "I was?" Collins hissed. "But he can't. He wouldn't." He trailed off, words collapsing under the weight of reality. Of course Marcus Hale would. Of course he would turn a moment of humiliation into a weapon. That was his style. Quiet, relentless, devastating. Other emails chimed in rapid succession. one from the managing partner of his firm, one from the general counsel at Meridian, one from Maria Chen, the lead attorney coordinating with the airline's board. All of them demanded explanation. All of them dripped with fury, thinly veiled as professionalism. Collins' hands trembled as he scrolled. The judge had already scheduled a telephonic hearing for 9 the next morning to review the motion. The trial would not begin. Not tomorrow. Not the way he had planned. Passengers pressed forward, eager to disembark, jostling past him in the narrow aisle. He sat frozen in his seat, unable to move. Brian tugged at his arm. "Richard, we need to go." Collins rose mechanically, moving down the aisle in a daze. His thoughts spun. He had been so certain, so smug, watching Marcus get shunted to the back of the plane. He had seen only weakness. He had failed to see what Marcus truly was, a strategist, a man who could turn even indignity into leverage. When they stepped off the jet bridge, Marcus was there, leaning against the wall, briefcase in hand, speaking into his phone with calm authority. His eyes lifted as Collins passed, and for a moment their gazes locked. Marcus gave the faintest nod. Not triumph, not mockery, just acknowledgement. A silent reminder that the game had changed, and Collins was already behind. Collins' stomach knotted. He turned away quickly, hurrying toward the baggage claim. His phone buzzed again and again, each vibration a summons he could not ignore. He finally answered one, his voice tight. "Richard," came the clipped tone of David Harper, Meridian's general counsel. "Explain to me right now what the hell this is. Why am I receiving notice from a federal court that the trial is delayed because of your failure to act at a boarding gate?" "It was nothing," Collins stammered. "A misunderstanding. A gate agent being overzealous. It had nothing to do with the case. Nothing to do with the case." Harper's voice rose. "Dangerous. Your name is in the affidavit. You watched our opposing counsel get humiliated by our airline, and you did nothing. Do you have any idea what this looks like? Do you have any idea what you've cost us, David? Listen." Collins tried sweat beating at his temples. "We can argue this down. The judge won't. The judge has already scheduled a hearing." Harper cut him off. "And if you think Judge Albright will dismiss this as trivial, you're more delusional than I thought. This isn't strategy anymore. Richard, this is malpractice. Get out of my sight. We'll be in touch. The line went dead." Collins lowered the phone, his hand trembling. The terminal spun around him, voices and footsteps merging into a dull roar. For the first time in years, he felt something he had long forgotten. Fear. Beside him, Brian spoke carefully. "What do we do?" Collins turned on him, eyes wild. "We fight. We salvage what we can. We spin this. Call the office. Tell them I'll be at the hotel in 30. And Brian, say nothing to anyone else." "Not a word." Brian nodded quickly, but his eyes betrayed doubt. The confidence he once had in his mentor was unraveling. As they pushed through the terminal, Collins could not escape the weight pressing on his chest. Every step felt heavier, every email vibrating in his pocket, another nail in the coffin of his reputation. He had built his career on power, on arrogance, on the belief that men like Marcus Hale could be dismissed. But now, in the glare of morning light, he understood the truth. He had underestimated the wrong man. Marcus Hale was not weak. He was patient. He was dangerous, and he had just detonated a charge that would echo through the halls of the court, through the boardrooms of Meridian Airlines, through every corner of the legal world that once spoke Collins' name with respect. By the time Collins reached his hotel, the ripple had already spread. Blogs buzzed with speculation. Reporters whispered about an unusual filing. Partners called emergency meetings. The name Marcus Hale was already on the lips of people who had not spoken it in years. Collins collapsed into a chair in his suite, head in his hands. His phone rang again. This time it was his managing partner. He answered reluctantly. "Richard," came the voice, cold and deliberate. "You've embarrassed the firm. You've compromised the client. You've compromised yourself. Pack your things. When this is over, we'll be reviewing your future here." The call ended before Collins could respond. He sat in silence, staring at the city skyline beyond the glass. The case he thought was his triumph had become his downfall, and the man he had dismissed at the boarding gate was now the architect of his ruin. Morning in San Francisco began with a thin fog rolling over the bay, cloaking the city in silver. From his hotel window, Marcus Hale watched the haze drift, sipping coffee in silence. He had slept little, but what rest he had taken was enough. The day ahead would demand everything of him. His phone vibrated once on the desk. A message from Leah. At the courthouse. Hearing scheduled for 9 sharp. Judge's clerk confirmed dial-in. Marcus set the cup down and loosened his shoulders. He adjusted his tie, the knot precise, the lines of his charcoal suit crisp. Today was not about appearances, but appearances mattered nonetheless. He picked up his briefcase, checked once more for the neatly tabbed documents inside, then left the room. The courthouse was already humming when he arrived. Journalists lingered near the steps, sniffing for a story. Attorneys hurried past, clutching files. Marcus walked with calm precision, his presence quiet but unmistakable. Inside, Leah greeted him with a nod, her dark hair tied back, eyes sharp with focus. "Everything's set," she said softly. "Clerk will patch you through in 5 minutes. Collins is already on the line with his associate. They sound frantic." Marcus allowed himself a faint smile. "Good. Let them be frantic. We will be steady." They entered a conference room where a speakerphone sat in the center of the table. A court staffer adjusted settings, then motioned for silence. At precisely 9 o'clock, the line clicked open. "Court is now in session," came the voice of Judge Albright, firm and unyielding. "We are here to address the defendant's motion for an emergency continuance. Counsel, state your appearances." Leah glanced at Marcus, who gave a single nod. She leaned toward the mic. Leah Ortiz, appearing with Marcus Hale, for the defendant in Avexa. On the other end came a flustered voice. "Richard Collins, Your Honor, for the plaintiff." Another voice followed shakily, his associate Brian. The judge's tone sharpened immediately. "Mr. Hale, I've read your motion. Emergency continuances are not granted lightly. Travel complications is the kind of excuse I expect from a junior associate trying to dodge a deposition, not from lead counsel on the eve of a 9-figure patent trial. So you had better convince me why I should not deny this outright." Marcus leaned forward, his voice even, measured, resonant. "Your Honor, this is not a request made lightly. This is not about inconvenience. This is about the integrity of the trial itself." He spoke with deliberate calm, laying out the facts as if they were surgical instruments placed one by one on a table. The valid Group 1 boarding pass, the refusal at the gate, the reassignment to the back of the plane, the public humiliation, and, most crucially, the presence of Richard Collins and his associate, who observed the incident without intervening. "These events," Marcus said steadily, "were not only unprofessional, they were prejudicial. The plaintiff's financial backer is Meridian Airlines. Their employees directly created an environment that compromised opposing counsel, and plaintiffs' representatives stood by as it happened. The atmosphere of fairness has been tainted before we have even entered your courtroom. There was silence on the line. The weight of his words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Collins burst in, his voice loud, desperate. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. Mr. Hale is exaggerating a minor misunderstanding. A gate agent made an error. That has nothing to do with the merits of this case. To delay a trial of this magnitude over a boarding issue is absurd." Marcus did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "With respect, Your Honor, it is not about boarding. It is about dignity. It is about whether one party can expect a fair contest when the other party's financial partner undermines them before trial even begins. To ignore this would be to condone it." Judge Albright's voice cut in, sharp as steel. "Mr. Collins, is Mr. Hale's account accurate? Did you witness the incident at the gate?" There was a pause. Too long a pause. Collins stammered. I saw a disagreement. I did not believe it was my place to interfere with airline procedures." "That's not what I asked," the judge snapped. "Did you see an airline employee remove Mr. Hale from a line he was entitled to be in another silence? Heavier this time." "Yes, Your Honor. And you did nothing." Collins' voice faltered. "I didn't think." "Exactly," Judge Albright thundered. "You didn't think. You stood by while opposing counsel was publicly humiliated by an employee of your own client's financial partner. And you thought the appropriate response was silence. Do you understand what that looks like to this court? It looks like a taint. It looks like the integrity of these proceedings has been compromised. And that, Mr. Collins, I will not tolerate." The silence that followed was suffocating. Even Leah, steady as she was, felt the weight pressing down. Marcus remained perfectly still, his face calm, though his heart beat steady and strong. At last, Judge Albright spoke. "Mr. Hale, your motion is granted. The trial is postponed 60 days. Plaintiff, care of Meridian Airlines, will bear the full costs of the defendant's wasted travel and preparation for this week. Submit your bill, and I will see that it is enforced." Collins tried to interject, but the judge's voice boomed over him. "Do not speak. Mr. Collins, not one word. You have embarrassed yourself, your firm, and your client. Use the next 60 days to reflect on legal ethics, if you still have a career left to salvage. We are adjourned." The line clicked dead. For a long moment, the room was silent. Leah let out a slow breath, eyes wide with restrained exhilaration. Marcus simply leaned back, folding his hands together, his expression unreadable. "That was," Leah began, searching for the word, "necessary." Marcus finished for her. Outside the conference room, the courthouse hummed with the ordinary rhythm of other cases, other disputes, other lives. But inside, both attorneys knew they had just witnessed something rare. A shift, a fracture in the veneer of arrogance that had for too long protected men like Collins. Marcus packed his briefcase calmly, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But inside, beneath the still surface, he felt the echo of victory, not the triumph of ego, but the satisfaction of precision. The truth had been laid bare, and justice, however briefly, had tilted in the right direction. As they walked out into the fog-softened morning, Leah glanced at him. "You know this won't just end here. The press will hear. The airline's board will hear. Collins' career." Marcus's eyes flicked toward her, his voice quiet. The ripple has only begun. And he was right. Already. Phones were buzzing in law offices across the city. Already, Meridian Airlines executives were convening emergency calls. Already, the name Marcus Hale was spreading with renewed force, whispered with respect, with awe, with warning. But Marcus himself felt only a deep, weary calm. For all the noise around him, the heart of it remained simple. He had refused to let indignity pass unchallenged. He had taken the humiliation of one gate and transformed it into a reckoning. And tomorrow, and the day after, the echoes would continue. At Meridian Airlines headquarters in Dallas, the boardroom was anything but calm. The long mahogany table that usually hosted quarterly earnings reviews and polished strategy sessions now bore witness to a crisis. The blinds were half drawn against the harsh Texas sun. But the heat in the room came not from outside, but from within. Eleanor Tate, CEO of Meridian, sat at the head of the table, her jaw tight, her gaze sharp enough to slice through steel. Around her, a cluster of senior executives shifted nervously in their leather chairs. Laptops were open, phones buzzing with alerts, aides moving in and out with printed copies of the motion that had already circulated across the legal and financial communities. The news had broken like wildfire. Within hours of Judge Albright's ruling, legal blogs posted about the sanction, dissecting the scathing words he had directed at Richard Collins. By morning, mainstream outlets had picked it up. Airline's gate dispute derails federal trial, read one headline. Another simply called it the Hale Gambit. Eleanor dropped her gaze to the motion in front of her. She had read it 5 times already, and still, the bluntness of its language burned. The humiliation of one of the country's most respected litigators, witnessed by Meridian's own counsel, now preserved in the court's permanent record. How did we allow this, she demanded, her voice low but vibrating with fury. The general counsel, David Harper, cleared his throat. The gate agent at JFK, Cynthia Rogers. She misinterpreted procedure. She insisted on a paper boarding pass. Hale only had mobile. She reassigned him. Eleanor's hand slammed onto the table. The sound cracked like a gunshot. Do not reduce this to procedure. Now do not insult my intelligence with euphemisms. This was prejudice. This was arrogance. And now it has cost us not only money, but our credibility in federal court. The executive shrank under her glare. Eleanor had built her career on discipline, on eliminating excuses before they could sprout. She loathed weakness, and today she saw it all around her. "Where is Collins now?" she asked. Harper's face tightened. "San Francisco. He's attempting damage control, but Judge Albright sanctioned us directly. Collins' firm has been removed from the case." Eleanor's eyes sharpened. "Removed?" "Yes, ma'am." The judge excoriated him in open hearing. "The firm's reputation is in shreds. We'll need new representation immediately." She exhaled slowly, as though steadying herself before the next strike. "Find someone competent, someone with integrity. I will not tolerate another embarrassment." And the gate agent. "She's been terminated," Harper said quickly. "Escorted out yesterday. That solves nothing." Eleanor snapped. "One termination doesn't rebuild trust, doesn't change headlines, doesn't stop the bleeding stock price. Indeed, on the financial reports glowing across the table, Meridian shares had dipped 3% overnight. A minor drop, but investors were nervous, analysts circling like vultures, whispering about cultural rot. Eleanor turned her gaze to the head of public relations, a young executive named Marcy. "Where is our statement?" Marcy shifted uncomfortably. We've drafted a release, expressing regret, promising review of training policies." Standard. Eleanor's voice was a whip. This is not a minor customer complaint. This is a national scandal. A federal judge has tied our name to discrimination in open court. Standard will bury us. The room fell silent. Eleanor stood, pacing slowly. Her heels clicked against the polished floor, each step deliberate. She stopped at the window, staring out over the sprawl of Dallas. Then she turned back, her voice quieter but more dangerous. I will speak to Marcus Hale myself. Gas rustled around the table. Harper leaned forward. Eleanor, that is highly unusual. Our lawyers created this disaster. She cut him off. They smirked at Hale while he was humiliated. They said nothing. They lost control of a case that was supposed to secure us $500 million. I will not hide behind counsel now. This is no longer a legal issue. It is a leadership crisis. No one argued further. They knew better. Eleanor returned to her seat, folding her hands. Find his direct line. Today, when I call, I will offer no excuses, no half measures. I will ask him what it will take to make this right. And whatever it is, we will do it. Not because we want to, but because we have no choice. Across the country, Marcus was already aware of the firestorm. From his hotel room, he read the headlines, each one a confirmation of what he had anticipated. He moved with quiet routine, answering emails, reviewing case notes, checking in with Leah. Outwardly, he appeared composed, detached even, but beneath, he felt the heavy thrum of exhaustion. He thought of the gate, the agent's dismissive sneer, Colin's smirk. He thought of his own restraint, the decision to hold back, to bide his time. It had paid off, but at a cost. Each incident, each indignity, left scars invisible to the world. Leah entered the room, carrying coffee. She set it down gently, studying him. They're in chaos, she said. Meridian's boardroom is apparently on fire. The press is calling you brilliant, a strategist who turned humiliation into victory. Marcus gave a faint smile, though it did not reach his eyes. Strategist? Warrior. Words they use when they want to celebrate resilience without confronting why resilience was necessary. Leah tilted her head. Does it bother you, the praise? He looked out the window, the city sprawling beneath him. It bothers me that it takes spectacle for people to notice, that every quiet indignity, endured by thousands who will never stand before a federal judge, goes unseen, that I must turn prejudice into leverage simply to be heard. Leah was silent. She knew better than to offer comfort where none could be given. Instead, she asked, what happens now? Marcus turned back to her, his eyes steady once more. Now we wait. The board will reach out. They'll want to settle. They'll want to transform punishment into redemption. And when they call, we will set the terms. As if summoned by his words. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Dallas area code. Marcus answered calmly. Marcus Hale. There was a pause, then a woman's voice, steady and direct. Mr. Hale, this is Eleanor Tate, CEO of Meridian Airlines. I imagine you know why I'm calling. Marcus's expression did not change, though his mind sharpened instantly. I have an idea. Then I'll be brief, Eleanor said. What happened at JFK was inexcusable. I am not here to defend it. I am here to tell you that it stops with me. I want to know what it will take to make this right. Not for optics, not for spin. For real. For the first time in hours. Marcus felt something stir inside him, not satisfaction, not triumph, but possibility. He let the silence stretch for a moment, then spoke. It isn't about me. Ms. Tate? Compensation solves my inconvenience for a day. It does nothing for the system that allowed it. If you're serious, then you'll have to change more than policy. You'll have to change culture. And that will cost you more than money. It will cost you humility. On the other end of the line, Eleanor inhaled slowly. Then tell me. I'm listening. The air in Marcus's hotel room felt charged after the call began, as though the walls themselves recognized the significance of what was unfolding. Eleanor Tate's voice carried across the line with an authority few corporate leaders ever achieved. She had built her empire through precision and discipline, but Marcus could hear something else now, a thread of sincerity woven into her tone. It was rare, and he did not intend to waste it. "Let's start with honesty," Marcus said, his voice measured, steady. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a clerical error. It was a manifestation of a culture inside your company that allowed a gate agent to look at me, see what she thought she saw, and decide I didn't belong. Your counsel stood by and laughed. You cannot frame this as an isolated mistake. If you want to make it right, you need to own it as a systemic failure. There was silence on the other end for a moment. Then Eleanor responded, her voice low but clear. I agree. I will not minimize what happened. We failed. Marcus leaned against the desk, gazing out the window at the skyline. Then here are my terms. You will not cut a check to me. You will not issue another hollow press release. You will create change. First, Meridian will partner with the National Black Law Students Association and the Thurgood Marshall College Fund. You will establish a permanent pipeline of internships in your legal and compliance departments. Not a token gesture. Paid positions, dedicated mentors, and a guaranteed interview for every participant upon graduation. On the line. Eleanor exhaled. He could imagine her pacing in her Dallas office, the weight of her empire pressing against her shoulders. Done, she said without hesitation. That program will begin within 6 months. Marcus continued, his voice sharpening slightly. Second, your current diversity training is a failure, or it would not have produced a Cynthia Rogers. You will not be allowed to grade your own homework. You will bring in an independent consultancy, one that my office recommends to audit your internal policies from the language of your manuals to the algorithms in your hiring software. They will rebuild your training from the ground up, with measurable outcomes and accountability. No slogans, no check-the-box exercises. Real change. Eleanor's pause stretched longer this time. Her legal team would resist. Her executives would bristle. Her shareholders might panic. But when she answered, her voice was steady. We will do it. Send me the name of the consultancy. I'll authorize the contract personally. Marcus let the silence return before he spoke again, his final demand carrying the weight of a gavel. Third, justice must not only be done, it must be seen. The sanction Judge Albright imposed is punitive. We will transform it into something constructive. My client has agreed to waive recovery. Instead, Meridian will double that amount and establish the Meridian Justice Foundation. Its mission will be to fund civil rights initiatives and legal aid for marginalized communities. Its board will not be controlled by your executives. It will be composed of civil rights leaders, legal scholars, and community organizers. This will not be charity. It will be legacy. For the first time. Eleanor's breath caught audibly over the line. She understood immediately what he was asking. Not just money, not just reform. A permanent monument to the airline's failure, rebuilt as a beacon, a transformation of humiliation into redemption. That is not a small demand, she said slowly. Marcus's tone remained calm, though inside he felt the old weariness pressing. Neither was what happened to me. Neither is what happens to countless others who do not have a federal case to amplify their voices. If you are serious, you will prove it. Eleanor walked to the window of her office in Dallas, gazing out over the flat horizon. She thought of the headlines, of the restless investors, of the fury that had erupted in her boardroom. She thought, too, of the young black men and women who would never step foot in that room, who would never have the chance unless she chose differently now. At last she spoke, her voice thick with resolve. "Mr. Hale, you are a remarkable man. You have every right to be punitive, and instead you are being visionary. I will not waste the opportunity. We agree to every term. The foundation will be established within 90 days. The internship pipeline will be in motion by summer, and the audit will begin immediately." Marcus closed his eyes for a brief moment. He had anticipated resistance, hedging, negotiation. Instead, he had found a leader willing to listen. It was unexpected, and it left him momentarily disarmed. "Very well," he said. "We will put it in writing. My office will draft the memorandum of understanding. You will sign, and then we will proceed." "Agreed," Eleanor replied. Then her tone softened, almost personal. "Mr. Hale, Marcus, I cannot undo what happened to you, but I will ensure that from this moment forward, our company becomes part of the solution. You have my word." The line went quiet as the call ended. Marcus set the phone down, exhaling slowly. Leah had been standing by, listening to his half of the conversation. She studied him carefully. "You just changed the trajectory of a corporation," she said quietly. Marcus shook his head. "I nudged them. The question is whether the momentum holds." Leah's eyes softened. "It will, because you gave them no choice." For the rest of the day, the ripple spread outward. Reporters caught wind of the direct call between Hale and Tate, speculating on what had been discussed. Rumors circulated about sweeping reforms, though none yet knew the details. In Dallas, Eleanor summoned her team and relayed his demands, making clear that compliance was non-negotiable. Executives balked, but she silenced them with a single command: "Do it." Meanwhile, Richard Collins sat in his hotel room in San Francisco, the curtains drawn against the morning light. His career, once gilded with arrogance, was collapsing in real time. Calls from his firm had grown colder, sharper, his reputation in tatters. He poured another drink and stared at the television, where news anchors dissected the scandal with glee. His name was now synonymous with failure, while Marcus Hale's rose with each passing hour. Back at his hotel, Marcus stood again at the window, the city glowing beneath the fading sun. He thought of all the people who would never know his name, who would never see the inside of a courtroom, who faced daily indignities with no recourse. He thought of the foundation that would soon exist, the internships that would open doors, the training that might prevent another Cynthia Rogers. Was it enough? No. It would never erase the scars of centuries. But it was a step, a hard-won, necessary step. Leah joined him, her voice soft. "Do you feel victorious?" Marcus considered. "Not victorious. Tired. But sometimes tired is the price of progress." She smiled faintly. "Then rest tonight. Tomorrow, we build." And as the city lights shimmered beyond the glass, Marcus allowed himself, for the first time in days, the smallest flicker of peace. 6 months later, the corridors of Meridian Airline's headquarters looked different. The walls, once lined with sterile photographs of jets against blue skies, now carried portraits of people, smiling faces of interns in crisp suits, community leaders shaking hands with executives, scholarship recipients standing on college steps, The change was not cosmetic alone. It was intentional, strategic, and visible. The Meridian Justice Foundation had launched with a flurry of coverage. Civil rights leaders and law professors sat at its helm, independent and uncompromising. Grants had already gone to neighborhood legal clinics in Detroit, to housing advocacy groups in Atlanta, to pro bono immigration lawyers in Los Angeles. What had begun as punishment was fast becoming a force with its own gravity. Inside the legal department, the internship program was underway. The first cohort had arrived a dozen ambitious young students, many of them the first in their families to step into a corporate boardroom. They shadowed attorneys, sat in on compliance reviews, asked questions that sliced through decades of complacency. The air in the department felt charged, like the first breath after a thunderstorm. Marcus Hale had watched from a distance, keeping his involvement quiet. He had no desire to be paraded as a corporate savior. He let the program speak for itself. Still, when he visited the headquarters one Friday morning, the interns gathered in the lobby whispered his name as he passed. He felt the weight of their eyes, their reverence, and something inside him stirred a mixture of pride and discomfort. Leah walked beside him, carrying her tablet. "They know who you are," she murmured. Marcus adjusted his cufflinks. "They know a story. Stories grow larger than the people inside them. But stories change people," she said. "And you gave them one that tells them they belong here." They entered a conference room where Eleanor Tate was waiting. She rose immediately, extending her hand. She looked different, too, not softened, but sharpened in a new way, as though carrying responsibility she had chosen rather than responsibility thrust upon her. "Mr. Hale," she greeted, her tone warmer than it had ever been. "Thank you for coming. I thought it was time you saw the seeds you planted." Marcus took her hand briefly. "I didn't plant them. I only insisted you water the ground." Eleanor smiled faintly, and sometimes insisting is the hardest part. The meeting that followed was not adversarial. It was collaborative. Eleanor presented updates, the progress of the audits, the adjustments in hiring algorithms, the measurable drop in complaints from frontline staff. She did not boast. She reported, precise and factual. Marcus listened, asking pointed questions, his eyes betraying neither approval nor condemnation. At one point, Eleanor paused, folding her hands. "Do you believe this is real, that we're changing, or do you still think this is just cosmetics?" Marcus studied her. The question was not rhetorical. He saw in her eyes the flicker of doubt, of someone who feared even her best efforts might still fall short. "You're changing," he said at last. "But culture doesn't shift in months. It shifts in years, in decades. You've begun the work, but you must never assume it is finished. The day you believe you're cured is the day the disease returns." Eleanor nodded slowly. "That is what I fear, that if I let go, it all slides back." Marcus's voice softened. "Then don't let go. Leadership is not just profit and numbers. It's vigilance. Every day." The words hung heavy in the air, but Eleanor accepted them without defensiveness. She had lived long enough in boardrooms to know truth when she heard it. After the meeting, Marcus and Leah walked through the lobby again. One of the interns, a young woman with tightly curled hair and glasses too large for her face, hurried toward them. She clutched a folder and looked nervous but determined. "Mr. Hale?" she asked breathlessly. Marcus turned, his posture calm, his gaze steady. "Yes. My name is Naomi Carter. I'm a second year at Howard Law. I just wanted to thank you. This program has changed everything. I never thought I'd have the chance to be here, to learn like this." I don't know what your fight cost you, but I wanted you to know it mattered. It mattered to me. For a moment, Marcus felt something crack in his chest. Not the sharp crack of anger, but the gentler break of a weight being lifted. He reached out, shook her hand. "You don't owe me thanks, Ms. Carter," he said softly. "Just promise me you'll use the door you walked through to open one for someone else." Naomi's eyes shone. "I will." Leah watched the exchange with a quiet smile. When they stepped outside into the Dallas sun, she asked, "Did you hear yourself? That was more than advice. That was legacy." Marcus said nothing, but the faintest of smiles ghosted across his lips. Meanwhile, in San Francisco, Richard Collins sat alone in a quiet bar, his suit wrinkled, his career in ruins. His name had been stripped from firm letterhead, his calls unanswered by former allies. He watched the television above the bar play a segment about the Meridian Justice Foundation, the camera panning over interns laughing in a conference room. His jaw clenched, bitterness curdling his drink. "He played me," he muttered to no one, "turned one gate into an empire." The bartender gave him a blank look and walked away. Collins sank deeper into his glass, realizing for the first time that arrogance had been his undoing, not Marcus Hale's cunning. Back in Dallas, Marcus prepared to leave. His flight was scheduled for the evening, another case waiting on the other coast. In the lounge, he sat quietly, the murmur of travelers around him blending into a familiar symphony of wheels, voices, and overhead announcements. When boarding was called, he rose, joining the Group 1 line. The agent scanned his boarding pass with a genuine smile. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Hale. It's an honor to have you with us." Marcus inclined his head, accepting the greeting without flourish. He walked the jet bridge, his steps steady, unhurried. As he settled into his seat by the window, Leah turned to him. "Do you ever think about how different it might have been if you had argued at the gate, if you had pulled out your card, demanded recognition?" Marcus leaned back, watching the ground crew move below. "Sometimes, but anger burns too quickly. Strategy endures. You don't win wars at the gate. You win them in the spaces where arrogance never expected you to reach." The engines roared to life, the plane lifting gracefully into the twilight sky. Below, the city stretched out, small and fragile, while above, the horizon seemed endless. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, the weariness still there, but softened now by something else. Not triumph, not peace exactly, but the quiet knowledge that change, however fragile, had begun to take root. The plane to Boston climbed steadily through layers of cloud. The cabin lights dimmed to a hushed glow. Marcus Hale sat by the window in seat 2A, the hum of the engines filling the silence between his thoughts. He had flown countless miles in his life, but tonight felt different. There was a quietness in him, not the sharp-edged focus of trial preparation or the simmering fury of humiliation, but something gentler, more contemplative. Leah sat beside him, scrolling through documents on her tablet. Though her attention flicked toward him every few minutes, she could read his silences as clearly as others read words. She had watched him dismantle adversaries in court, turn prejudice into leverage, and transform a moment of indignity into sweeping reform. But she had also seen what it cost him the weariness beneath his calm, the loneliness of carrying battles others never saw. "You're far away," she said softly. Marcus turned his head, his gaze lingering on the endless stretch of night sky. "I'm thinking about verdicts," he replied. "Verdicts?" He nodded. People believe verdicts are delivered in courtrooms, by judges or juries. But the truth is, The most important verdicts are delivered elsewhere at gates, in offices, in conversations where dignity is either affirmed or denied. I've won cases worth billions, but what lingers in me is not the numbers. It's the look on Naomi Carter's face when she told me the internship changed her life. Leah set the tablet aside, giving him her full attention. That's legacy, Marcus. That's something even judges can't write. He exhaled slowly. Legacy is fragile. It depends on vigilance, on others picking up where you leave off. I think of all the times I've been silent, all the times I chose strategy over confrontation. Did I do enough? Did I leave others to bear what I refused to fight in the moment? Leah reached for her glass of water, her voice even. Strategy isn't silence. You chose your battles so that when you struck, the world couldn't look away. If you had shouted at that gate, it would have been a footnote. Instead, you made it a headline. And from that headline came change. You turned a slight into a structure. Marcus allowed himself a faint smile, though it was tinged with sadness. Perhaps. But I wonder how many others are left in those lines every day, without a platform, without recourse. They endure indignity, and the world does not shift an inch. He thought of Cynthia Rogers, the gate agent who had set this chain of events into motion. Fired, forgotten, a cautionary tale in news articles. He did not pity her exactly, but he felt the complexity of her presence in the story. She had been small-minded, but the system had made her powerful in the wrong way. She had believed her rules mattered more than his humanity. One act, and she had rewritten both their lives. Leah seemed to sense his thoughts. Do you ever wonder what happened to her? Yes, Marcus admitted, but not because I want her punished further. I wonder if she learned, if she saw what followed, if she understood the ripple she created. Change doesn't come from punishment. It comes from recognition. I wonder if she recognized herself. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, a gentle rocking that reminded Marcus of the precariousness of flight, of life itself. He closed his eyes, letting the rhythm steady him. Across the aisle, a young man adjusted his tie nervously, flipping through case notes on his laptop. Marcus recognized the signs immediately, the restless hand movements, the whispered rehearsals, the anxious tapping of feet. A lawyer, perhaps on his way to his first big case. When the man accidentally dropped a folder, paper scattering near Marcus's feet, Marcus bent down, gathered them, and handed them back. Their eyes met briefly, and Marcus saw gratitude mixed with nerves. First trial, Marcus asked quietly. The man flushed. Is it that obvious? Marcus smiled faintly. I've been there. Remember this, the courtroom is not about winning every point. It's about earning trust. If you do that, the rest follows. The young lawyer nodded, as though those words carried weight heavier than any textbook. He sat back, calmer now, while Marcus returned to his seat. Leah observed silently, her lips curving in a smile. You can't help it, she said. Help with planting seeds, even when you don't realize you're doing it. Marcus leaned back, staring at the dark sky beyond the glass. Maybe that's the verdict I was looking for. Not in court, not in headlines, in the quiet moments when someone else feels less alone. The announcement came from the cockpit, smooth skies ahead, arrival on schedule. The cabin settled, passengers sinking into sleep or screens. Marcus remained awake, his mind turning over the long arc of justice, the weight of history pressing and releasing with each breath. He thought of the foundation, already funding cases he would never touch. He thought of Naomi Carter, preparing for her bar exams one day, perhaps walking into a courtroom with the same fire he once carried. He thought of Eleanor Tate, a CEO who had chosen humility over denial, and what it had cost her to do so. And he thought of himself, a boy who once watched his father turned away from a counter for reasons never spoken but deeply understood. That boy had grown into a man who now turned humiliation into policy, insult into institution. He felt both the victory and the exhaustion of it, the endlessness of a war fought in increments. Leah shifted, resting her head lightly against the seat. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Do you ever wish for peace instead of progress?" Marcus's reply was soft but unwavering. "Peace without progress is just silence in disguise. I'd rather be tired with progress than rested in stagnation." The engines hummed steady, the night stretching endlessly beyond the window. For the first time in a long time, Marcus allowed his shoulders to ease, the tight coil of vigilance loosening. He had not solved the world. He had not ended prejudice, but he had shifted the ground beneath it, just enough that others could stand taller. When the plane descended toward Boston, city lights blooming below like constellations, Marcus gathered his briefcase. Another case awaited, another battlefield. But as he looked once more at the young lawyer across the aisle, now sleeping with his papers clutched against his chest, Marcus felt a quiet affirmation. The verdict was not a gavel strike or a judge's ruling. It was here, in the lives changed, in the doors opened, in the seeds planted. And as the wheels touched down, Marcus Hale knew the story was not his alone. It belonged to all who would walk through those doors after him, carrying both the burden and the hope forward. And so, from one humiliating moment at a boarding gate, an entire empire was shaken. What began as a cruel dismissal became a turning point, a demand not for apologies, but for action. Marcus Hale didn't choose anger. He chose strategy. And because of that choice, young interns now walk through doors once closed to them. A foundation funds justice in communities long ignored. And even an airline once blinded by arrogance now carries the weight of reform. But let's not forget discrimination should never be the spark required to light change. Behind every headline is a wound. Behind every reform, a story of pain that should never have existed in the first place. This story is a testament to resilience, but also a reminder of the cost when dignity is denied. As you reflect, ask yourself how many more Marcus Hales are forced to prove their worth in spaces they already belong, and how many times must justice be fought for in places where fairness should be the rule, not the exception. If this story moved you, if it made you think, made you ache, or made you hope, please like, share, and subscribe. Stay with us for the next chapter, where we continue to expose injustice and celebrate the strength of those who rise above it.